Hi, I'm Jackie Bowker and welcome to Lydian.
Hi everyone and welcome to this episode of Just Jackie. So today I have Catherine Cashmore with me. So she is a buyer's advocate with over 14 years experience in the real estate industry. She is also the president of Prosper Australia, which is Australia's oldest economics organisation. She's also a media commentator, as well as being a guest university lecturer, and she's also the editor of numerous financial news publications. So welcome, Catherine.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, good. Thank you for being here. So first of all, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, you did a really good job just then telling everyone about me. So obviously I work as a buyer advocate. So I run a buyer advocacy agency and I help, everybody really, from first home buyers to investors to expats, developers. So looking at land, analysing what you can do with the land and going through the assessment and negotiation process with different individuals. I am president of Australia's oldest economics organisation. So this is an absolute passion of mine. This is an organisation called Prosper Australia. We're very focused on tax reform, on removing taxes off income and productivity and putting them onto monopoly rents. And this is something that the classical economists advocated, and particularly somebody called Henry George, who was an economist in the 1800s. He wrote a very famous book called Progress and Poverty, which was a bestseller of its time. It's kind of been written out of the history books a little bit. He's not so well known now, but he was a very compelling author and compelling figure in his time. And he came and did a tour of Australia. And that's actually when the organisation that I now preside over was initially established with the premise of changing the tax system. So really we can all prosper, which is where the name comes from. So it's freeing people to work as much as they want without being taxed, but obviously on the things that you don't earn, which is land price inflation and monopoly rents from mining, which Australia obviously has a big exposure to. Those are the things that are taxed away. And finally, I write for a publishing company called Factel Investment Research. I do a number of newsletters for them, Cycles, Trends and Forecasts and the Land Cycle Investor. And this is about the real estate cycle, not the real estate cycle as your listeners may have heard about. So, sort of the real estate cycle runs for 7 years or 4 years or everywhere's on a different property clock. This is far more established in a much longer cycle, which has a number of 100 years of history behind it. So around 300 years, we can trace it back through real estate data, but much further through other data, the financial data. And it's teaching people how to invest with the knowledge of this cycle, why this cycle occurs, why it applies to real estate, how it applies to Australian real estate, and how you can use that to inform your investments on the real estate market and the stock market. So those are the things that I do, and I'm very passionate about all of them. So you're welcome to ask me questions about any one.
Amazing. My gosh, it is so diverse. That is absolutely incredible. So this cycle that you're speaking about, is this the 18-year land cycle that you've done a lot of research on?
Yeah, that's correct. And I'm not the first one to do research on it. It was discovered it was discovered in relation to real estate. You can trace an 18-year cycle back very, very far. It's always existed and there's a lot of history behind it. But in terms of its application and its relativeness to the real estate market, it was discovered in the 1930s by two individuals. It's perhaps a little bit argumentative as to which was the first, but one called 𝐓𝐢𝐻𝐸𝐸, who wrote 100 Years of Land Values in Chicago in 1933. And he realized, as he was doing the analysis on Chicago, and Chicago was a growing city at the time, it had a lot of development, there was big population growth, and he noticed through his research that there had been these kind of 4 waves of cycles that had run at an average of 18 years. And another man who found that its application was far more broad across the United States was a real estate valuer, economic forecaster called Roy Wensley, who was prolific in his time, although again, he's almost been written out of the history books. He did numerous TV interviews, lectures. He ran an investment company and a real estate analyst company. and wrote yearly analyst reports for the real estate market. He was very prolific. He was called upon by investment banks and big financial institutions to help them forecast the market. And he also recognized that there was an 18-year cycle on average that applied to US real estate. Now, there's been a long list of authors through history that have recognized a cycle. Wenslick, I think, did the most research on it, but it also applies in the UK. Economist called Fred Harrison has done a lot of work on it in the UK. And I've primarily done work on it in Australia, how it applies to Australia and how it applies to other parts of Europe, where you can trace back the long-term housing cycles. Now, this cycle has a sequence to it of events that happen in the same order over roughly the same period of time, over and over again. So it becomes a very easy cycle to enable people to forecast. But more importantly, it's a cycle that really acts like gravity to the economy, because as we would know, or anybody listening to this would probably be aware and a little bit savvy, that our banks lend predominantly against real estate as collateral. In some points in the cycle, it can be as much as 80 to 90%, between Australia or overseas, that the banks are lending on against real estate as collateral, whether it be a business loan where you have to put up real estate as collateral, or whether it be a residential mortgage. And most of the lending is against residential real estate. And so when real estate values, we know that they cannot just keep going up and up to the same pace over and over again without having some kind of downturn. And there is a significant downturn that comes at the end of this 18-year cycle. It kind of goes for sort of 14 to 16 years of rising real estate values, and then there's a drop at the end. And once the real estate values drop below the loaned funds in the bank is where you get a financial crisis or crash, such as the subprime crisis, such as the savings and loans crisis in the early 1990s. And of course, even if you just use recent history to try and understand this, and this is how I always try and explain it to my clients, is that, if you go back to the last real estate land-based led recession, which was in 2008, the subprime crisis, we just missed it here. I don't know. I mean, I was working in real estate at the time and it wasn't a nice market at the time, but obviously there were a lot of bailouts that were given to the banks, and also we had the mining boom that was going on at the same time. But it was a worldwide led real estate recession. You go back 18 years from there, you get back to 1991, which was the recession that we had to have. With the savings and loans crisis in the US was known as, and it was a very severe recession actually in Melbourne. Real estate values in Melbourne, well, the commercial real estate market dropped 50-60% in median value, and the residential real estate market dropped around 10% in median value. But if you trace back the actual property prices and what happened to them at that time, some of them halved in value. You go back 18 years from there, you get back to 1973-74, which was the OPEC crisis, but was also a real estate land price-led downturn. You go back 18 years from there, you get back to 1955, which again was a real estate-led recession. And so you can trace these cycles back with fairly good regularity. To an extent through the Australian economy, we've had periods of time where we've not had speculation on real estate, but certainly back in Europe and the US. So that's really a little bit of analysis on the 18-year cycle, but it's obviously a lot broader than that.
Wow, that is so fascinating. So where are we at in the 18 years at the moment?
Well, the 18-year cycle is it's punctured by a recession mid-cycle, which can be severe, it can be mild. So, for example, like the early 1980s recession, which was quite a severe recession, it had quite high unemployment. But it didn't affect real estate values too significantly. Yeah. And then in the last real estate cycle between the 1970s and the early 1990s, that was between the early 1990s and 2008, the recession that punctured that cycle in the middle was the dot-com bubble and burst, which affected the US market more than it did our market, but it was a mild recession and it didn't affect real estate values. The recession that's punctured this cycle was, of course, the COVID downturn, which we forecast at Factel Investment Research many years in advance. And that was obviously a recession that hit the economy very severely, but again, it didn't significantly affect land values. In fact, we had a boom throughout that period. And so we're in the second half That's the recession that punches the cycle. Now we're in the second half of the cycle. It's generally a very bullish half of the cycle. It started off very bullish. We've had a bit of a downturn through the fear of rising rates and so forth, lack of borrowing power this year. But I expect that the cycle now to continue up to around a peak in 2026. And then we should be going into a land-based led recession into 2028. So that would be the end of the cycle, and that would be the period of time that you really need to understand. A lot of people say it's time in the market that matters when it comes to real estate. And to an extent, that's right. If you buy a piece of real estate and hold on to it 20 years, it's going to be worth more in 20 years' time than when you purchased it, give or take. But you can also time the market. And with a lot of people now that where they do buy real estate for hold on to it for 1 or 2 years or maybe 5 years, that timing can be extremely important. And this is where the cycle is very important. And it's also worth recognizing that there's a lot of real estate value in the stock market through building REITs and building companies and infrastructure companies. So it has a significant effect on the stock market as well. And there's always a very sharp stock market downturn in those recessionary points.
That kind of leads on to my next question. So being a buyer advocate, how do you educate your clients when it may not be the best time for them to buy?
So I always explain the cycle to my clients, whether they're home buyers or not. Because real estate in Australia is expensive for a reason. That's because we have an economy that is bent towards speculation on real estate. We all understand it and know it. And that's why we have capital growth in real estate, because we allow people to keep the gains that happen from real estate through, a train station being built and your land price goes up in value, and very little of that is taxed away and you come away with this big capital gain. Right. So a lot of people that are investing in real estate, they don't want to buy it, even if they're a home buyer and know that it's going to go down in value at some point in time. So whenever I have a client come to me, we always talk about timing, what it is they want to achieve. They may have home buyer needs, and whatever it is needs to be balanced against that. But they need to be aware that there is a timing to the economy. And it is a clock that can be timed. It can be timed very accurately through a number of measures. And through that timing, they need to be aware of where they need to not be in high debt and not high leverage, and the times if they really want to take advantage of this cycle, which of course is the other benefit of understanding it, is the amount of money that you can make from the knowledge of the cycle, is when it is a good time to leverage. And you will not get that information from the media, because the media will only, it's like a weather forecaster, it will only be reading what the weather is based on looking out the window in the short-term future. So interest rates going up, oh well, that's going to cause a bit of fear in the economy, but there's no real understanding of what's going to happen to real estate in the years to come. My service is to give that surety and understanding based on cyclical knowledge and the history that goes behind it, and understanding the theories that underpin it. And when you understand all of that logic that underpins it, and that it does produce a cycle, and it's a cycle that can be timed, then you're not so nervous about, should I buy real estate right now because the RBA may be increasing rates and everyone's saying we're heading to a recession. And the majors who are, the major banks who are invariably wrong with their forecasts, unfortunately, because they don't do this kind of research. But, they're saying, well, we're looking at a 20 to 30% fall in real estate values. And, the clients that I deal with aren't so nervous about something like that happening, because they know that the timing isn't there quite yet. So now actually is still a good time to invest in real estate, as long as you understand where the peak in the cycle is and what you want to do. Now, it doesn't mean you have to sell when the cycle is coming up, because what we know historically is, unless something interrupts the cycle, like a war, for example, the world wars interrupted the real estate cycle. Unless something interrupts the cycle, real estate values recover relatively quickly in the bigger cities, and they usually exceed their previous peak in the first half of the following cycle. So if you have a good piece of real estate and can weather that downturn, you're not highly leveraged against it, then there's nothing wrong with holding on to it and understanding and having the assurity that the cycle is going to continue following that. So that's no. So when I deal with investors, it's really about teaching them this theory behind it, and then we get down into what do they need to buy in order to make gains in this cycle. And I think this is really important as well, because you can go wrong with real estate. You can buy real estate in the biggest boom. You could have bought it in the 2000s boom, which really ran from around 2003 to ran to 2007. We had a bit of a downturn in 2008. Then money was pulled into the real estate market and it boomed up till 2010. But if you didn't buy the right piece of real estate, you could have ended up with a piece of real estate that really didn't go anywhere in terms of value, gets hit very hard in the downturns. And to be honest, anybody that buys real estate wants that real estate to go up in value. There's such a thing called positive real estate where people buy for yield and they have to take a little bit of a hit maybe on the capital growth. But, understanding what to buy, where to buy and how to time it with the cycle is really about what my service is catered for.
Wow, this is just so fascinating. It is awesome to hear you explain it all. So can you tell us why you decided to partner with Lydian?
Oh, well, Lydian, I think, came at the end of me fishing around with different mortgage brokers and not having much success. I think that the broking industry and how you structure your finance is incredibly important. It's just as important as the job that I do, which is telling people what, where, when, and how to buy. I actually hadn't had a good experience with many mortgage brokers until I came into contact with Chris and met him and referred some people to the mortgage brokers at Lydian and had an absolutely brilliant experience with them, had clients that were extremely happy and then had a very, very good connection with you guys as well. So it's been a pleasure, working with you, and I absolutely would, recommend you to anybody that I come across.
Amazing. That is so nice to hear. And our very last question, just quickly, if you had to choose, what would you choose out of having hands for feet or feet as hands?
Yeah, so you gave me a heads up to this question, which did leave me to think a little bit about it. I think I would rather have hands than feet, understanding that you can walk on hands and do stuff with them. So yeah, I think feet are fairly useless other than just for walking on. I could be wrong. If I didn't have hands and only had feet, no doubt I would have skills with my feet that other people didn't. But yeah, if I had to choose, then it would be hands.
Amazing. And so this chat has just been so fascinating to me. So anyone who's watching now, where can we find you online?
Yeah, so do a Google of me. You can find my major website at 𝐓𝐢𝐦𝐻𝐬, but please look up the work that I do at Fat Tail Investment Research. If you Google Fat Tail Investment Research, you'll come across the financial newsletters that I write, which are Cycles, Trends and Forecasts and the Land Cycle Investor, Cashmore's Real Estate Wealth, and you can have a look at those and see the content. And the content is very broad and vast, and I'll send you some links so that maybe you can put alongside this video when it gets
absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Catherine. As I said, absolutely fascinating. So thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome. Thanks so much. Thanks.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye.
You too. Bye.